Now we are going to deal with the largest contributing factor in all of this. As you can see, greed and carelessness has been a major cause of most of what you've seen. But how do you suppose humanity has responded to this problem? Have the world leaders, the wealthy, the powerful dropped everything to prevent hundreds of millions from starving to death? Well, unfortunately, no. In fact, the only response so far has been to see how much can be profited from this crisis. These next clips will deal with how money printing by America caused this food shortage to be compounded with a spike in commodity prices. And then, as if this wasn't enough, international banks and trading firms then turned around and bought up as much of the food commodities as they could, which then spiked up food prices even further.
Do you believe that any of the growing political unrest around the world, especially Tunisia and Egypt, is linked to higher food prices, which the questioner says results from the Fed's large-scale asset purchases?
I'm not sure I accept the premise of the first half of the question.
Well, we reject Ben Bernanke's rejection of the premise, and here's why.
It's not just Egypt. We're seeing it in Algeria, Tunisia, Jordan, Yemen. The list goes on. All countries with something very critical in common. The people are being strangled by soaring food costs now at their highest levels ever. Coupled with high unemployment, the cost of food has been the uniting force of revolt. For the lucky Arabs who actually have a job, it's estimated they spend up to 80% of their income on food. And guess who's behind the price spikes? Washington, Wall Street, and trouble squeezes our world's poorest. It is releasing torrents of anger and frustration, people blaming their governments for the results of this rampant speculation. But the biggest blame does not lie on Wall Street. The most sinister driver of exploding global food prices is in the hallowed halls of our central government, hell-bent on covering up 2008's massive megabank theft. The Federal Reserve's answer to cover up that theft was to turn on the money printing machine in overdrive, creating trillions of new dollars on their computers, pumping them into our economy to cover up the bank's losses. The consequence, lowering the value of our currency. And as we continue to do that, investors and non-investors alike are watching commodity prices soar in correlation to that money printing. Corn, wheat, copper, oil, you name it. And it's not just in those other...
Remember the real estate bubble? Wall Street wanted to hedge all those bets it made on mortgages, so they ramped up their bets on commodities. And when Wall Street started losing money on subprimes, they betted on commodities instead. By 2008, Wall Street had 5 times more futures contracts in commodities than it did in 2002. Commodity indexes held about $13 billion in 2003. By 2008, it was over $250 billion. That's how we got the oil bubble. Add record high gas prices to the cost of shipping food, plus speculators looking for another bubble, and you get a food bubble. By 2008, the UN estimates speculators held 65% of corn futures contracts, 68% of soybean, 80% of wheat. By mid-2008, the IMF food price index jumped more than 80% in just a year and a half before. We don't notice price hikes so much because most of our food prices come from marketing and packaging. But in the developing world, the price of food is everything. And what country imports more wheat than any other? Egypt, where the price of wheat rose 70% last year. Last summer, Goldman called a report on the role of speculation in food prices, quote, misleading, and blamed other factors. A lot of reports mention that Russia cut off its wheat supply last year. What they don't tell you is why. Because futures traders asked them to.
Now remember, the initial challenge was that in order for an interpretation of prophecy to be correct, it must be in perfect harmony with every word of the Bible. So let's look back at the black horse. Do you see anywhere where it says there will be a food shortage? When you examine the wording closely, it does not actually say there is a shortage of food. It just says the price of food becomes very high, but does not specify as to why. All of us, including me, assume that the reason the price of food would become high is because there would be a shortage. Now notice what the media has recently begun calling a major world crisis.
Food prices soar to record levels across the globe as the World Food Security Committee meets in Rome to redefine food security. What's behind the price hike? What can the international community do to head off another world food crisis? Global hotspots for hunger are growing. Some say we're facing another world food crisis. But the crisis appears to be with the cost of food rather than a shortage. So what are the reasons behind the rise of food prices? Well, firstly, the increased demand for biofuels like ethanol, which require corn for their production, have impacted the price of food. Climate change and extreme weather conditions are also being blamed, while population growth has led to an overwhelming demand for staple food groups. But a shrinking rate of production has made food a very lucrative commodity, bumping up its price further. Prices are going up. A lot of theories as to why. What do you think the reason is?
Well, I mean, the issues you mentioned at the beginning are certainly responsible for the long-term slow rise in prices. But what we're seeing now is unprecedented. We're seeing extreme rises, 10% in the last 2 days on corn, huge rises in staple foods like the price of wheat. And we think it's down to the speculators, the hedge funds, who are throwing money at food commodities because they see a quick buck. 90%, approximately 90%, we think, it's not transparent, so we can only speculate ourselves, but 90% of positions in food commodities are held by banks, not by legitimate hedge traders who are trying to manage their risks, food producers. So to say that it's not a problem, I think, is burying one's head in the sand.
But decisions about who pays and how much aren't made at the register, says journalist Frederick Kaufman.
Imaginary wheat being bought and sold by financial giants is controlling the price of real wheat.
They're made on Wall Street by big investment firms who distrust dollars and euros and instead hedge their bets on commodities.
Who's winning? You got it. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest holders, the largest financial dealers in this, they're doing very well.
As mentioned in that story, the soaring price of rice is a worldwide problem. It might be uncomfortable in New Zealand, but the third world, it's lethal.
Only at $92 a barrel. If we were to go back to $147 a barrel like last time, that would push all these prices 60% higher. That's a big problem because these prices are high right now on the wholesale level. They're making their way to the supermarket. Go to the supermarket.
And the thing is, they're not only talking about higher prices, which is a big enough concern, but they're also talking, the World Economic Forum apparently warning that a rising global population, greater prosperity, are putting unsustainable pressure on resources. And they say, Eric, we could be looking at the specter of shortages, which could lead to social, political instability, geopolitical conflict, and irreparable environmental damage. I mean, this is something that could affect us on many levels.
Not could, will affect us. You see this?
The I word, inflation, happening everywhere. At the supermarket, food prices set to go up 4% this year. The drugstore, Procter & Gamble, hiking prices to absorb $1 billion. They say commodity cost increases. And at the pump, gas prices up 6 cents overnight. And at the mall soon, where those blue jeans are going to cost a lot more thanks to a big surge in cotton prices, just as shoppers are starting to spend again.
The CEO of the world's largest retailer has a very important warning for all of us, for U.S. consumers. He says that serious inflation is indeed on the horizon, and it's going to have a very big impact on basic necessities like food and clothing. Eric Bolling, the host of Follow the Money on the Fox Business